Freisinger. Used to be Sorensen. That's what I went on an exchange as in 2009, 2010 to Germany. But today I'm actually going to focus on the next adventure I took back in 2017 when I hiked the Appalachian Trail. So I do have a presentation to kind of help visualize where the trail is and everything like that. So I'm going to pull that up and you should be seeing my screen now. Is it working? I see some heads nodding. Okay, perfect. So I hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2017, and as you can see from the map, it starts in either Georgia or Maine, depending on where you decide, and it's about 2,100 miles long. It was completed as a full trail back in 1937, so it's actually been around for quite a while. And the first through hiker was in 1948, Earl Schaefer, and he had wanted to walk off the army. That was the catchphrase of him. So nowadays, though, it's really become pretty popular. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. Around 2,000 to 3,000 people start it every year. And then the coolest random fact about the Appalachian Trail, we liked to think when we were on it, was that it's always ups and always downs. So you're never walking on flat ground. So the elevation change of the whole trail is the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest 16 times. So we kind of like to pat ourselves on the back thinking that we may not have actually climbed Everest, but we technically did the same thing or the same amount of work. So that's where that goes. And so this is the start of the trail for me. My aunt actually started on the trail with me. She hiked 2 weeks. That was her plan. And everyone kind of gets their picture taken around under this arch. It's the very typical, I'm starting the Appalachian Trail through hike. Then I'm going to go through the pictures kind of quickly because there's only a few and they're not super related. But one of the things that is different about the Appalachian Trail compared to the other long trails in the United States, which is the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail, is the shelter system. So as you can see, a couple people and I are sitting at one of the shelters, and they're every 10 miles or so throughout the entire distance of the trail. So if you don't have a tent, you actually don't need one. As there's a bit of a platform here that the two people in the back are sitting on. And at nighttime, everyone will lay out their pads and then you'll kind of sleep like sardines in a can if there's multiple people there. Some things about the shelters. They are not clean, they're not maintained. So you really have to watch out for mice. If you're not careful with your food items, you will definitely have mice getting into them. So that's the biggest thing about the shelters is they're very mice infected. So people always get the first trail under the arch at Amicalola Falls State Park, and then this is the trail. This is the picture that everyone hikes the Appalachian Trail to get. The Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail don't really end in very spectacular places, but the Appalachian Trail ends on top of Mount Katahdin. So when you finish the trail, you actually have 13 miles left to go down the mountain. So, but it is as you can see, if you hike it on a clear day, you can see for miles throughout Maine. So it's really a very spectacular view. And then I'm gonna stop sharing now because those are the only pictures I've got. So just some basics about my trip. My trail name was Cowgirl. As you may have seen in my bio, I am a dairy nutritionist. So Cowgirl really fits since I spend my working days with cows. And then the daily life of the trail for me was you rise and you set with the sun. So if it gets dark earlier, you go to bed earlier. And one of the most annoying things on the trail was when weekenders or people who are coming out for just the weekend would backpack and they'd stay at the same place as us, but they would stay up till like 10 o'clock. And we were oh my gosh, we're exhausted. Why are they still awake? So it's a very different lifestyle when you're through hiking because you don't have clocks, you don't worry about the time. And you just when it's light out, you're hiking, and when it's dark out, you're sleeping. Um, and then so kind of two things to kind of focus on next. One of the things that people often ask, so you guys all know this from your traveling experience, you know that when you get back from a big trip, people are like, "Oh my gosh, how was it?" And essentially you're like, "Well, it was 6 months. Like it was kind of a long, I mean, it was good and bad, it was everything in between. Like what do you want to hear about it?" So the tagline that most people want to hear is like the best thing that happened, the worst thing that happened, and what was your favorite part, right? So for me, the best thing that happened is it's a combination of events. So when I started out, I started hiking in boots, which most people hike in boots. And I thought it was normal. And I'm like, okay, this will be great. Hiking in boots, no big deal. Um, I had about 500 miles of really, really, really bad blisters. And usually when you're through hiking, you'll lose toenails and you can't really walk unless you've got the pack on your back and you're doing that 10 to 15 to 20 miles a day. But for me, I was actually developing trench foot. So like it was not working out. And I went through about 4 pairs of shoes in the first 500 miles. And um, as you all have probably experienced at some point in your life, you are working towards a goal and you know exactly what you want to do and you're doing everything in your power, but something is getting in your way that you have no control over. So for me, that was my feet and the fact that there was not a pair of shoes that I could find that was going to let me keep hiking. So in Virginia, somewhere in Virginia, I kind of hit my breaking point and I was pretty much going to quit. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it because I just couldn't walk. So like when you're hiking all day and you're getting to the point where you're crying for the last 5 miles because your feet hurt so bad, it's maybe time to rethink why you're out there. Um, and what ended up happening was I tried on my camp shoes. So I had a pair of Tiva sandals that I decided to just give my feet a break from the boots because at least then nothing would be rubbing them. And it was working out really, really well. So I had 3 days with no pain. And I'm like, oh my gosh, 3 days, no pain. This is a dream. So that is when I made the very unconventional switch to sandals. And I threw my boots in the garbage. It was like, I'm never going back to boots again. And I decided to buy Chaco sandals. They're a little bit more of a durable sandal than my Tivas. They were already falling apart after 40 miles. So I was like, well, I gotta replace these. Um, and so I went to an outfitter in this really weird town in Virginia that was not, it didn't see it. I was super uncomfortable. I was wanting to quit, but I go to this things. I'm not in the best place mentally, right? And I go to this store and they don't have my size. So I'm like, oh my gosh, like I cannot physically get any further without another pair of shoes. What am I gonna do? And this gal in that outfitter called another store that was an hour away. And she said, they have your size. If you can get to that store, you can get them. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't have a car. Like, I've been hitchhiking this whole time, anyways. How am I going to hitchhike off the trail an hour and then get back? So, um, then this other lady who would just happen to be in the store at the same time, she looks at me, she says, and she says, well, I'll drive you, like, no problem. So this gal drives me an hour to this store. Older lady, she was a teacher, on the verge of retirement. Just it was the summer, she didn't have a ton to do. So we get to the store.
That is so awesome. That's
I
such an
know.
awesome story.
Well, it gets better, believe me. So we get to the store and I tell them my story and I'm like, "Oh yeah," and I'm like freaking out because I really don't want to quit and I really need these shoes, but I have really wide feet, so I don't know if they're going to fit because my feet are a little wider than normal. I generally buy wide shoes. And the lady at the store said, "Oh my gosh, we special ordered some wide Chacos for someone and they didn't work for that lady. Do you want to try them on?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course I do." Try them on. They fit like a glove. It was literally perfection. Then the lady at the store, the owner of the store said, "You know what? We can't sell them anyways because they were a special order. Why don't you just take those for me?" And oh my God. I mean, by this point, I'm bawling because it is clearly the universe was telling me, you're not going to finish or you're not going to stop hiking this trail. You're going to finish because we're all working in your favor. And so
Such a
when,
great story. That's so awesome.
yeah, it's obviously it still makes me super happy because that sequence of events is the only reason I finished the trail because I was to the point where I couldn't go on anymore. And the reason I bring that one up when people say like, "Oh, what was it like?" is the trail is full of extremely deep lows and then extremely intense highs. And it also makes you realize that everyone is somehow working in your favor, you might just not know how. So even though I was trying so hard to make shoes work because I was afraid to hike in sandals because I didn't know anyone else that did. So I'm like, well, I don't want to stub my toe on trees and have all those issues. But I tried something new and it ended up really, really working out for me. Um, and then when people talk about or when people ask about what the biggest challenge was, it actually wasn't on the trail at all. And I think a lot of you can relate to this in that coming home was by far the most difficult part of my entire journey. And it's it's really cool when I look back because now it's 4 years ago Tuesday that I started. And I look at how I I look at how the trail helped me realize so many things about life in general. And then even though I got home and I was like, okay, I was ready to quit my job. I put my house on the market. I was just gonna be so not in New Richmond, Wisconsin, which is where I lived at the time, um, anymore because I was just really, really unhappy. And one of the things that was nice is that I remembered feeling similar. Hi. I remembered feeling similar after coming back from my exchange, but I wasn't allowed to drop out of high school and not keep living. And I'm like, okay, nope, nose to the grindstone. And because I was able to realize that I wasn't actually depressed with my life, I was just dealing with a lack of endorphins from not hiking 20 miles a day, things did get better. Um, but it most people are always surprised to hear that the hardest part of the whole trip was coming home. So, yeah, and then I guess the biggest piece of advice, since a lot of people also ask about advice when it comes to long distance trails, is that the trail provides. It always does. And I've taken that into life now too, which is, you know what? Everything is going to be okay. I don't know how and I don't know what that looks like and I don't know if I'm going to finish, but it's all going to work out and it was a great lesson to learn. So yeah, that's kind of the down and dirty of the Appalachian Trail, but I figure it was better to ask questions since I don't know exactly what you guys wanted to hear. So,
No, for sure. Can you just in your bio before we go to questions, you had mentioned the other two trails. Can you tell us in general about them and
yes.
kind of your plans, or is this one a year or one every 5 years? But more like where are they located in the country and what, are they generally more difficult than what you just did, etc. Then let's go to questions after that. How about that?
Perfect. So yes, hiking the Appalachian Trail made me realize that my life goal is now hiking forever as long as I can, um, which is a little bit unrealistic in some senses because it was kind of expensive and I do have a job and I like my job. Um, so the Pacific Crest Trail is, it only traverses 3 states because California is super long. So it starts in Mexico and ends in Canada at the borders and goes through California, Oregon, and Washington. Um, it is also open to horses, so you can actually ride the whole thing, and pack animals. So the Pacific Crest Trail, in terms of terrain, is less difficult because it's flatter. So like the Appalachian Trail, like I swear the entire time walking it, my eyes were on the ground right in front of me. And if they weren't, then I would fall down. And that's not an exaggeration. I fell every time I took my eyes off the trail. But the Pacific Crest Trail, from what I've heard, I haven't hiked it, is that because it's available to pack animals, it's a little bit smoother terrain. In terms of elevation, the Pacific Crest Trail is known for being a lot more difficult than the Appalachian Trail, partly because the mountains are taller out west. On the eastern coast, the mountains aren't as high. The highest peak is down in Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains, and I want to say it was only like 6,000 feet elevation. So when you're looking out west and you've got all the 14ers, 6,000 is not much. So that would probably be the next trail I would want to hike, partly because it's not as hard as the third trail I'd want to hike, which is the Continental Divide Trail. It's also from Mexico to Canada or vice versa. And it goes through Montana, Colorado, New Mexico. Ooh, it's somewhere, it's like right where the Continental Divide is. I'm not exactly sure which states. There's also a Continental Divide bike trail, which that's actually on the roads. And that is one other thing that people will do is they'll bike the Continental Divide Trail. That is the newest of the big 3 trails in the US. So it is the most rugged. Some friends that I hiked with on the Appalachian Trail had done the Continental Divide Trail, and the way they describe it is it's full of grizzly bears, so you really have to worry about that. And then there are it's not as well known as the Appalachian Trail. So you'll be like walking along and people are like, what the heck are you doing here? Like, why are you even here? Versus on the Appalachian Trail, everyone kind of knows what's going on. There are still some people that are like, oh my gosh, you're actually doing that. But very few people are surprised. It's really easy to get rides because everyone knows that you're not an axe murderer. You're just a hiker on the Appalachian Trail. And it's really easy as a young woman to get rides, because everyone wants to keep me safe. So that would probably be the third trail that I would want to do. Um, in terms of timeline, that's a little bit tough. I do really like my job. And even though I got 6 months off from my job to do the Appalachian Trail, I don't know how it's going to work when I ask for it for round 2. We'll see. My plan was initially my husband and I were going to hike it this past, and again, we were going to just quit. I was just going to quit my job and then find another one after the trail. COVID really changed that. I did not feel comfortable relying on the general public and restaurants and hotels during COVID. The other thing that changed it was we actually moved out to my family's farm, and that wasn't an expected thing. It just kind of all fell into place for us. And then the third thing that changed was my husband fell off a roof and broke his hip and pelvis and shoulder. So we didn't know how the hiking future was going to be. So thankfully, hiking is back in our future, and our next trail is going to be going out to Maine. And actually, I'm going to show him a little bit of the Appalachian Trail, and he'll be able to hike. So that's really exciting. So hopefully within the next 5 years, but we'll do one of them. But I don't really know. It's really up in the air. Our plans have already changed so much that I'm not going to even pretend to know what the future holds. So, does that answer the question? Oh, you're muted, John. We can't hear you, John.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I said
Oh,
that does answer the questions, and thanks so much. And let's open it up for questions from the group.
I have a question,
yeah, of
Cameron.
course.
How did you prepare yourself for this walk? I'm sure you were not a couch potato and then just started walking. So what did you do?
So, interestingly enough, I actually didn't do any extra physical activity than my normal life. So in my normal life, I have dogs. I walk my dogs. At that time, I lifted weights. I don't anymore since I don't live right next to the gym like I used to. I do yoga, just do random stuff like that. And what they say is the best way to prepare for long distance hiking is to hike. So essentially, what that means is when you start hiking, take it real slow. So start off with 5 to 7 miles or 5 to 10 miles a day. And if you're getting done at noon, great. Sit around camp and enjoy the woods. Every
Can we
single
start
person.
with 1 or 2 miles a day?
I
Does it
mean,
have to be 5 or 10? I'm kidding.
well, it depends if you want to finish. um, but there was a lot of people that I met that started out by doing big miles, and they said, "Well, I trained at home. I prepared for this." Like I said, nothing prepares for hiking except for hiking. So start small, and if you're going on a 1 to 2 week trip, don't plan any more than 5 to 10 mile days because you will hurt yourself, and it's just not. It's not worth the injury. It's a lot better to just enjoy the woods for a little bit more time and take it slow.
Great, thank you so much. Olga, any follow-up to that, or did that answer your question?
No, thank you. I do have another question, but the other people have questions too. They should go first.
So I have a question actually. How much did you save up to prepare for this?
So that's also a funny story. I didn't. Um, I didn't know that I was going to hike in 2017. So in October in 2016, I talked to a coworker about my biggest fear is that I would never get to hike the Appalachian Trail because of this job. And he's like, "Well, why don't you just talk to the boss? Like, who knows?" So in like December or January, I talked to my boss and he's like, "Oh yeah, we can make that work. This year would be best because we had just hired someone new." And I was like, "Oh my God, like I'm not ready." So I actually got a loan. And I knew that I was coming back to my job. So I took out a loan for $12,000. The reason I needed that much money is because I owned a house too. So I actually had to cover my mortgage payments when I was gone and cover my hiking expenses. Hiking expenses can be either very frugal or very lavish. The more often you stay in a hotel, the more it's going to cost. Your biggest expense without hotels is definitely food because as a through hiker, you will eat anything and everything that people will give you. I mean, usually like a 5,000 calorie day would be a low one. You'd be shooting for like 7 to 10,000 calories all the time, and then you're still hungry. So your food budget is a pretty big one. But I would think that it would be pretty easy to do for like $4,000 to $6,000 if you're frugal. That's essentially how much it costed me. So yeah. Does that
That's
answer the
great. And
question?
how long again did it take the whole thing?
Yeah, so I started on April 6th and I finished on Mount Katahdin on October 3rd. So it took me a little bit longer than it should have, partly because I stopped in New York City and visited Jasmine Hafner, who spoke to you guys a little while ago.
For sure,
And
that's awesome.
Yeah, so when I visited her, I actually fainted in an elevator and broke my nose. So after that, I was like hiking so few miles because I had a concussion and all this stuff. So I was a little bit slow after New York, and I was not drinking. I just fainted. It was apparently I was working my body too hard, so it
So,
shut
so
down.
it took you about 6 months. And is that, I mean, if we wanted to plan doing the entire trail, would that be a good general? I mean, we're
Yeah.
not all as young as you on the call.
6 months would be very, very normal. So the more time you take, the more you have to worry about weather. So if you're going to take longer than 6 months, you actually need to start earlier because they close Mount Katahdin due to weather at I mean, I guess it kind of depends. It can be as early as October 1st, and sometimes it's as late as November 1st. So if you're planning around it, you have to plan around being able to summit Katahdin. Otherwise, what's the point if you hike the whole
For
way
sure.
and then
If you get
finish?
all the way there and then you don't summit. That's
Right.
awesome. Greg, you had a question. And I just have to say, Cam, I love your energy. You really have great energy.
Thank you. That's really nice.
Cameron,
Yes.
okay, John, I didn't know if you had called someone else. This is incredible what you did,
Yeah.
and I agree with John. It is so fun to listen to you. So, did you stay in hotels? Did you eat out along the way, or did you have all that? Did you have a sleeping bag and food with you, or how did you do that?
So you do a little bit of both. So I would have about 4 to 6 days of food in my backpack. And then every time I would go to town, I would sleep in a hotel because that was the only time I showered. So um, you really like hotels. And then usually what I would do is there'd be other people from the trail that we'd all kind of go into town together. So 4 people would split a hotel room, usually to cut costs. Unless you're, like I said, if you want to be lavish, you can have your own. Um, and then you take a shower, go to the grocery store, and definitely try to go to a restaurant and eat as much as you can.
Great. Thank you. Greg, go ahead.
Stephanie asked several questions that I was going to ask, but a few others. Do most people who do the full trail go north to south or south to north? And
Go on.
another question is, you showed us those shelters along the way. Did you personally carry a tent or sleep in the shelter when you had to? And lastly, some of my friends who have hiked the Superior Hiking Trail, they pre-positioned freeze-dried or whatever food at places along the way. Did you also pre-position food along the way so you didn't have to go into town and buy stuff?
So oh shoot, now I forgot your first question. I'll talk about the tent since I forgot the first one. Shoot.
Let me see. Well, my first question was north, south, south.
Oh, yes.
North.
Thank you. So the majority of the people hike south to north.
Okay.
There are some people who will hike north to south, and then there are some people who will do what's called a flip-flop. So they'll start in the middle, they'll go north, then they'll go back to the middle, then they'll go south, or vice versa. The reason for doing all of these different timelines is probably personal and also time dependent. If you start in the north, you're going to start in probably June or July. And Maine, New Hampshire, and Maine and New Hampshire are really difficult, like really, really hard. So a lot of people start in the south and go north because Georgia, where it starts, is comparatively, oh my gosh, it's super easy. At the time, I thought I was dying, but compared to how hard it was in the north, it's really nice to start and kind of work your way into really difficult terrain. I did carry a tent and I also slept in shelters. So if you don't carry a tent, you're completely restricted. If the shelter is full when you get there, you don't have a choice. You either are sleeping outside or you're continuing to walk. And I also didn't know how it would be as a young woman by myself, what the shelters would be like, and I didn't know how comfortable I would be in them. I mean, you can't control who you're around, but in your tent you can. I mean, yeah, it's not really very secure since it's fabric, but I felt more secure if I was ever feeling unsafe. The other reason that I preferred a tent was because once you zip it up, you've no idea who's in there. So there was someone that I hiked with for a little while, and he was like 6'5", big guy, ex-military, all that stuff. He had the same tent as me. So you never know what you're gonna get when you open the tent. It's either gonna be scary guy or me. So it made me feel a little bit more comfortable. And then in terms of food, so I did prepackaged food and I had it in boxes, and then I had my mom send that to me. So she would send when I would tell her where I was going to be, and then you can send it to a post office. Then you can go and pick it up at the post office and get that food. Hindsight 2020, I would never do that again. Um, I had no idea how much my preferences would change and what I would actually want to eat. So planning what you're going to eat for 6 months is hard, and especially when your desires change and your cravings change and you're just hungry all the time. So when you get your trail mix for the 10th week in a row and you're like, I really just don't want this. But then you have it, so then you have to eat it, and it's I regretted having done that. For smaller trips, like when I've also gone on this Superior Trail, definitely makes sense to have food pre-prepared, and then usually have it either send it to a post office, or a lot of businesses along trails will hold food for you.
Yep.
So for instance, there's some outfitters on the Superior Trail that you can drop your food box off, go to that business, and then you don't have to spend any money going to a grocery store, and it's a little bit easier. So for 1 to 2 weeks, I would definitely do that. Any longer than 2 weeks, it's easier to just buy it in the grocery store. There's a lot of different foods that you can get that are good. None of them are healthy. um, but you kind of you get what you get. So
What did you do for water?
you have a filter.
Okay.
And so in Georgia, there's a ton of springs. So a lot of the water doesn't even need to be filtered. Don't let anyone tell you that you can always drink unfiltered water, but you have to be smart about it because it can be dangerous, is what they say. But if it's coming out of the ground, it's probably fine. So there's a lot of springs throughout. Otherwise, rivers, everything like that. And always try to get stuff upstream. The worst water I drank was from a lake, and I just had a bad taste. But I mean, you do what you do. Yes.
Oh, Chrisanne can go first. Sorry.
Oh, Karen too. I'll go. First of all, John commented on your energy, and this entire presentation, I'm reminded of how it was so much fun working with you in Rotex, and how supportive you always were with all the outbounds and the inbounds. You were just really a valuable member of the team, and your energy continues today, and it's just so fun to see it.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Your story about the sandals just really warmed my heart, because if you have a chance to read the chat, Greg said something, John said something about how just trusting the world that they're just going to work out. And I'm not at all surprised that these women got into your story and wanted to give you a hand, and it was no big deal. And I mean, that's just a story of a lifetime. I really loved it. So thanks for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
Hey, Elka.
Oh,
You're out of your car.
can I jump in?
Yeah.
Can I jump in? Oh, Cameron, what a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Of course, I'm listening to you and thinking that you are the female Bill Bryson. And you've got the best sense of humor, just like he did, or he does. And, and I'm thinking about your lack of preparation and his lack of preparation. It's just, I'm sure you've read his book.
Yes, oh my gosh, it makes me laugh every time. It's very realistic, and just like, oh my gosh, just the things that happen.
Yeah. I have two questions for you. We heard about the boot ordeal that you went through, and oh my gosh. What did you find, other than your sandals that you got, what did you find was essential equipment that if, so I have, what was absolutely essential for you, a few things. And then secondly, where do you hike in the Midwest? What do you do to meet your need to be out on a trail these days?
Okay. So, what became essential that I had no idea, and I used to hike and think that people who hiked with them were weird, and now I bring them everywhere, is my trekking poles. I
Oh,
use them as a younger person, you only see older people with them and you don't, but like even when I go on vacation down to Arizona, it's like bring my trekking poles for a day hike. So they became my absolutely favorite piece of gear. Um, in addition to that, it's a little bit tough to say what was my most favorite stuff because I only carried what I needed. And I mean, I had one extra shirt and a pair of shorts and a pair of pants and then a jacket. And that was it. So like no clothes, very few. Since I had sandals, I didn't even have socks anymore.
did you just
And
burn it? Did you burn it all when you got home?
well, it was a little bit sentimental, so I put it in a box, of course. um, but so I mean, yeah, other than my trekking poles, I don't it was all so vital because I mean like you need your sleeping bag, you need your tent, you need your stove to cook your food. And I didn't really bring anything that was oh nope, I had one thing that was unnecessary in my pack the whole time. And my grandpa had passed away about 2 weeks before I left on the trail. So I carried his ashes with me for the whole trip, which was this is the only thing that wasn't part of my gear that was in my bag. So kind of special, which is
Oh,
yeah, kind of neat.
have you seen,
Really,
have you
really
seen,
cool.
have you seen the movie The Way? Have you seen the movie The Way?
Oh, you know what? I haven't. I need to, because my mom has actually done the Camino. So, which she did that because she was inspired from my Appalachian Trail trip. So, if you're looking for something that um, is a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? Accessible to someone who can't carry a lot of weight. The Camino is spectacular. Since you have a place to stay every night, your pack weight is probably only going to be 10 to 15 pounds. For the Appalachian Trail, you're probably going to be in the 20 to 30, and that extra 10 pounds can really do a lot on joints if you start that. So the Camino is something I would recommend. And then for hiking in the Midwest, it's always it's a struggle, but it's also one of those things that in the Midwest, hiking isn't my main priority. So there's a lot of state parks around here. So like Willow River, Afton, Interstate is just gorgeous. And the first time I went to Interstate after I got back from the trail, I actually burst into tears because it reminded me of it. It was like, oh my gosh, the terrain is just the same. So it is possible. The Superior Trail is wonderful. But around here, how I get my fix is mostly just walking my dogs. I mean, and it's not the same and it never will be, but that's the other thing that I'm sure you can all relate to. So your exchange year was amazing, but it's never going to happen again. So it's like, okay, if I'm going to be backpacking, it's never going to be the same and it's just going to be what it is now. So a day hike at Willow River State Park, it is what it is. I mean, it's definitely not as challenging, but I'm also not in as good a shape as I was. So like I'm still huffing and puffing in Wisconsin hills. And actually one of the hardest hikes that I've been on probably since the trail was this past summer at in the very northern tip of Indiana that's basically Chicago. So it's Indiana Dunes State Park. Oh my goodness. Hiking on sand dunes
Oh,
is insanely tough. And it's in the Midwest. So, I mean, but that was some of the hardest hiking I have ever done. It was just really, really challenging. So, I mean, and the Superior Trail is actually a very big challenge too. There's a ton of ups and downs, and the terrain is really rocky. So, and it's very rugged. So, it exists. It's just not mountains.
I, as you were doing your presentation, a number of times thought, are we talking about trail hiking here or exchange? the challenges and how things are. Like there are so many similarities I
Yes.
found. I think everyone on the call probably as well. Just difficulty and exchange providing and all the rest. So I love the tie-in. I love the tie-in to both of them.
Yeah, it's pretty relatable for an exchange student, which is kind of cool. So, anyone else interested in hiking?
Hey, Cameron, I have a comment.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned interstate, and as I mentioned, I'm the mayor of St. Croix Falls,
Yeah.
and we have Wisconsin interstate. I don't know if you're referring to Minnesota, but our sister city, not officially, but Taylor's Falls is where interstate in Minnesota is, and we're in St. Croix on the other side, the better side of the river.
Yes, I agree.
We are also the start of the Ice Age Trail.
Yes, I've heard of this.
That's a 1,200-mile trail that goes through Wisconsin all the way up to Door County. And we just had a gal do a winter through hike with a dog. And she's the first female to do that hike. And she started up in Door County and ended in St. Croix Falls, which was a lot of fun. But it's beautiful. And I live about a block from the trail. So my kids and I do sections of that quite frequently. And this summer, we're hoping to do some overnight stays on the trail as well, on some of their campsites. So you're always welcome to come over here. I don't know where you're from. Are you from Wisconsin?
I live in Amery. So I go to St. Croix Falls for Menards probably once a week.
Oh, sure. I go to Amery all the time.
There we go. Yeah. And actually the Wisconsin side is the interstate that I'm a fan of. That's actually where we got married last year, me and my husband. So it's very special for me.
Yeah, no, in the beginning of the meeting, I talked about how, in our planning meeting last week, we wanted to do more get-togethers in person or start doing them. And interstate was one of the locations that we mentioned. So if we do it, your husband and you would be like very, very welcome to join us.
So did you, when you're on exchange, did you go to interstate with your exchange kids for the Halloween party?
As a Rotex, yes.
Oh, yeah, because you were an exchange out of the U.S. Yeah,
yes. Yep. I was. Yeah, I went there many times. I think I was.
So that was my former club, was Taylor's.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I noticed you're friends with Mo, who was an exchange student in St. Croix Falls.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember him. He went to prom at the same time as because he was 10, 11, right?
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah.
Where is he from? Remind me.
Brazil, I think, or
yeah, he went to prom with me in the same. We had a group. I went with 4 Brazilians and me.
Okay, that's awesome.
In the Richmond prom.
It's a party.
Yeah, it really was. So yeah, I remember Mo pretty well.
Yeah, so he was in our club. He was our exchange student, and he was great at basketball. So our St. Croix Falls Saints basketball team loved him because it was like bringing someone in, like a ringer in from out of state. So it was great. Well, that's fun. Small little world.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to we under meetings with the Rotary 4-way test, and these are sort of the guiding principles of Rotary, and I'm not sure if you've seen these or not, Cam, but we just all take ourselves off of mute. So we'll do that. We'll read it together and then take any final questions and end the meeting in a few minutes. So the Rotary 4-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth?
The truth? Is it fair
to all concerned?
Will
it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
So on behalf of the E-Club, we just really thank you for the presentation today. It was fabulous, really great. Please come back and join us anytime. We're here. It's always the same link, always fun and interesting topics. Chris Ann, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot again. Our speaker for next week.
Ms. Elka.
Yay.
Great.
Yeah, we have our discussion. There was an email sent with some poems that you can listen to and a podcast.
Yes,
so come with
I will get a
to share.
reminder. I'll get a reminder out about that. And what's nice about this book club discussion is that the poems aren't very long, right?
Mm-mm. Yeah, they're not
Yeah.
very long. And you can either read, I think sometimes you can read them, but they're definitely like, there's all audio. Can put it on the
Versions.
car on your way up to Interstate Park.
For sure.
And yeah, so I'm excited. Come with some thoughts to share. It'll be a pretty open discussion. I have not learned how to use Procreate yet, so it'll just be us. No, like
Sounds good.
fancy.
Be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. Nice to see everybody. I'll be back in the tundra next week, so
We'll keep it cold for you, John. I promise.
good. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate your efforts.
Hi, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks,
Okay.
Cameron. Really appreciate it.
Thank you
Good
so much,
seeing you
Cameron.
again.
It was great. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
And